Hello, and welcome to Art Laughs with me, Verity Babs. Today I spoke to Pierre Novellie. I'm here with Pierre Novellie. Pierre, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Pierre Novellie, and I've decided to make it look like I live in a kind of mansion for a fancy art podcast. I want to look like I have my own collection behind me.
I love it. I think it looks great. And you have chosen a very grand painting for us.
A bloody massive one, the Night Watch. I've got the full name up. It has an alternate name. Militia Company of District 2 under the command of Captain Frans Bannick Koch, or the Night Watch, which is a lot easier to say.
Where have you come across this? How do you know it? Have you seen it?
I have seen it, yeah. The first time I ever realized it was being referenced is it's a parody of the Night Watch is the cover of a Terry Pratchett book. There's a series of Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett about the Night Watch of the fictional city that most of the books are set in. And it's full of references to like the early days of like the development of the idea of the police, or the early police force in the 1700s in London was called like the something runners. They were called like the Whitechapel runners or something like that. And they were like a kind of proto police force.
Sort of like vigilante style, or?
They were officially sanctioned.
Okay.
But it was like the evolution of guy whose job is to shout the word fire when he sees a fire. Or like guy whose job is to be in charge of the gate, you know. How that idea came to develop and stuff. But that's anyway, that's in the book. But the cover is a parody of the Night's Watch with all the kind of fantasy characters in the same poses. Inside the leaf of the book, it said, that's with apologies to Rembrandt or something, or some reference to, by the way, this is a very clever thing we've done here. I don't know if when you said introduce yourself, you meant job as well. I'm a stand-up, and I've done a few gigs. I've done a few gigs in Amsterdam, stand-up comedy, at Toomler Comedy Club, which I assume still exists. And I would go to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam and poke around, and that's where the Night Watch is displayed on an enormous wall.
I was in Amsterdam a couple of years ago. I knew the Rijksmuseum was there and that one ought to go, but I went to the Contemporary Art Museum sort of across the road to look at some Banksys and feel angry about stuff instead. So I feel like I should have gone. I think that's the thing. I've learned not a lot, but Rembrandt is something that they love to cover in like art history degrees. So I feel like I know some like techniques that he uses, but it's never been something that I've been super passionate about. Whereas when you look at this, do you feel engaged with character, or what is it about this that appeals to you?
I've never seen, so I've done a little bit of painting myself, and it's a lot easier to appreciate something if you've tried to do it yourself. I mean, the only sport I've ever had to play in my life was schoolboy rugby. So when I do watch rugby, which I'm not into sport, but if I do, I can see how good they are. Whereas other sports I can't, because I have no reference point. I don't know how hard that is. I don't know what golf is. I don't know if it's hard to hit the ball or not. But because I've tried to paint things, when you look at this painting, and when I was looking up stuff about it for this, they've uploaded an enormous high resolution image that you can look at it. You can like zoom in sort of infinitely. And to see someone create the effect of patches of natural light, not light overall like in a studio, but the kind of dappled sunshine you get in a kind of intermittently cloudy and sunny place like, say, the Netherlands or Northern Europe, and to see that perfectly represented playing off metal or lace is just astonishing. The level of skill is astonishing. And also the fact that it is a commission by a sort of shooting club.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah. That's one of the things I loved about going to the Rijksmuseum, is that you would see this portrait of a guy in a big floppy hat with a feather in and lacy cuffs and covered in medals and necklaces and things.
Yeah.
And a big ruff. And you think, because if you have experience of British galleries, you would go, okay, so who's this? The Duke of whatever.
Yeah.
You'd look and it would be like the Harbour Master of Schmooplenberg. What the fuck? Because the Netherlands was so unaristocratic and so sort of dourly egalitarian.
Yeah.
The amount of money from just being a merchant meant that all of these beautiful commissions and these men in these aristocratic clothes are literally like the guy whose job is to tally the boats. that come in and
That's
things.
so
It's not
cool.
aristocratic at all. It's really interesting because if you just showed someone a picture of a big wall in the Rijksmuseum of these portraits, you'd go, oh, more inbred, dukes or whatever.
You can see like the chin is like passed down through the portrait of his dad next to him to his son. And
yeah, but it's not. It's just these guys who like there's some crazy estimate that like they've added up the amount of paintings that were produced during the golden age of Dutch painting, which were the Dutch masters. And it's like 5 to 10 million. Like we only have a tiny percentage of them surviving because everyone was just able to buy a painting because they had this powerful merchant class of kind of a proto middle class. And everyone was commissioning paintings of their fucking living room, their cat, a bowl of fruit, who cares? And so there's loads.
Have it all, paint all of it.
Yeah, they really did. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to go to the Rijksmuseum is because when I was at school, I saw all the Dutch masters and it was like a windmill with a muddy river. And I was like, what the fuck? This isn't a king at all. What
am I going to do with this? Yeah.
What? Who cares? And it was more about the fact that the owner of the windmill was able to pay for that with 100 guilders or whatever. And the fact that it was the first depiction of ordinary peasant countryside life. No one bothered to paint it before. And so there's a whole class element to it as well that you only realize when you start prodding around in it. But it looks on the surface really boring, really dull.
Well, yeah, I guess if you look on the surface, it's like, okay, aristocratic scene. If you like zoom in a bit more, you'll probably find some more sort of like peasanty characters, but isn't that just what we're used to here? But then knowing that it's just a completely different system in Central Europe and in Western Europe, and to just work out my surroundings there. I think, Rembrandt is obviously someone that I think quite a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily say they like art probably at least respect, even if they don't like it, because like you say, if you have any idea about how to do painting, you know that this guy could paint. Like no one can sort of doubt that. So I guess he's probably one of the more accessible people, even though his this is arguably a very exciting scene, but based on the color palette and that kind of thing, you might not look at this and immediately be like, wow, especially on the internet, because in real life it's huge. But I think just the fact that it's properly painted, I guess, probably gives him some brownie points. Oh yeah, especially with people who, like you say, who aren't sort of super into their art in some way, but like people do like technique. It's an easy way of seeing that something's good. But no, it is huge. I mean, the measurements don't really mean anything. It looks like the size of a kind of billboard by the side of the road. Wow, that big. It's fucking enormous. Here are the measurements. It is 3.6 meters by 4.3 meters. So it's 2 doors by a door and a half. Lordy. I think exactly how tall a door is. A door is 2 meters because I'm almost 2 meters tall. So that's how I know. You know how close you are to bumping into it at any given point. Yeah, exactly. I can see how close I come. But yeah, it's basically it is like a bunch of guys who are like civic militia, like the mayor's civic militia. Mm-hmm. Got clubbed together, and there's a record of their receipt where it's like, oh, everyone pay in their tenner and we'll get this guy to do a nice painting of our cool cool club. And that's it. That's the only reason we have one of the most famous priceless works of art in the history of the world, is because a social club of guys. A club social. Everyone chip in and afterwards we'll go to spoons. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And they happened to end up with this thing. They had to roll it up in a enormous bulletproof case and hide it during the war, and there's a hole in the ceiling of the Rijksmuseum in case it ever needs to get moved again because it's so big. It's like the soul of the nation almost. It's such a big deal in the Netherlands. Someone tried to get it through the door the first time and they were like, we are not doing that again. Yeah. And I think I was interested as well because I'm originally from South Africa, and I have like the era of the Night Watch is probably the last time that any of my ancestors lived in the Netherlands before they moved to South Africa. Mm-hmm. The 100 years after the Night's Watch, the kind of early 1700s. My grandmother was Afrikaans, so that's why I have a French name. It's a long story. It's a big lowlands mix-up. The Dutch that went to South Africa, with a few exceptions, mostly went there unofficially, as opposed to the British Empire. Okay. So a lot of them went there off their own bat because they were Huguenot refugees. They were weird, hardline Reform Church Protestants or something. And they just sort of showed up. It was like the Amish kind of, not quite as extreme, but pretty dour. Sort of. As opposed to like
the Queen wants you to go and build a church.
A more specific mission. This one was just sort of, just fancy it.
Just, I'm going to have a farm in the middle of nowhere on a continent I've never seen. And you think, you're ill. You're absolutely ill. They're just very mercantile people. And that's why you get things like people having the spare money to commission this giant fucking thing.
Mm. And growing up in South Africa, what's the sort of artistic culture there like, or how did you experience art as a child? Was that something that you were exposed to a lot, or not very much?
No, not at all. No, not at all. I mean, I left when I was quite young, but it's not like, it's easy to be a nerd in South Africa. I'll say that it's a bit like the bit of it, the socio-economic and cultural and racial bit of it that I'm from, which is not the majority by any means, quite the opposite, is a bit like maybe the sort of the bits of Australia that aren't Melbourne or Texas or something, you know.
Okay.
Not exactly, I wouldn't call it a painter's paradise.
No.
There's lots of contemporary stuff, but in terms of like exposure to casual social exposure to art, it's not very likely. Lots of comedy on TV and things like that. Yeah, lots of storytelling and stuff. Definitely that. Performing is a bit more of a thing, but yeah, sort of art and painting and things would be. I don't know really. I mean, I'm sure there's been some sort of renaissance of like modernist stuff, but the history of the country is so strange and warped. So you wouldn't probably even if anyone was doing any officially sanctioned painting in the apartheid era, you'd probably not want to value it too highly as art. That would be an act of awful prostitution.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about having done some painting. Is that sort of in a very casual way, or was that ever a route you might have gone down instead of comedy?
I thought about going to art school or some sort of graphic design thing when I was at school. I did art in sixth form and did a lot of it. But I didn't like being told what to do. And so commissions would have been my way of making money, and I would have really hated them. And I thought, this is something I really like that wouldn't survive the transition to economic viability.
I think a lot of artists have that thing at the moment where it's like, you know, I just want to make the art, but then also with that comes having to do art you don't want to do because someone's paying you to do it, but then also having to work out a way to sell your art or finding an audience and that kind of thing. So that's why lots of artists now, as soon as they've got the money to do it, they're like, I'm getting an agent or I'm getting a manager who will do the paperwork for me, because being an artist, and I guess also to a certain extent being a comedian or any kind of performer where you're having to sell yourself basically, is you've got to be able to market yourself, and that's not necessarily the reason why that wasn't the skill set that made you think I should be a comedian because I'm really good at networking. You know, that's not where that comes from. I'd
love to run a small business from nothing, a startup. That is definitely also the worst part of doing stand-up. The constant social media marketing attempts that you're supposed to be doing. But yeah, exactly. And I thought, well, I'll keep it for myself, you know, I'll keep it as a hobby or something I'll do intermittently. And I do bits of it, like it's crossed over. I used to do caricatures, and I've done art a few times as part of Mark Watson's sort of marathon shows. I did a slightly shoddy acrylic paint portrait of him on a canvas that he auctioned off, where they got the proportions wrong. I don't know. You know, it was okay. It's on my Instagram. You can look at it. I do it I do it as a painting and drawing as a hobby. It's just a very sort of hard. I get very frustrated with myself while I'm doing it. So it's not like I enjoy having done it. I don't enjoy doing it. Maybe it's like running in that respect.
Is that like comedy as well?
Yes, maybe. But I think from a lazy point of view, I'm probably naturally better at comedy than I am at art. And art requires more practice. And I've missed those crucial years where you get all your perspective and proportion training in. Your draftsmanship skills, you know. Well,
that's the interesting thing, I think, of people who see comedians who haven't got a background in comedy or performing. And one of the things, is sort of a mark of a good comedian, I guess, is how relaxed you make your audience in knowing you know exactly what you're doing, but also making it look like you're just having these thoughts on the spot and they're coming completely naturally to you. So, you know, whereas with painting, you do have that draftsmanship, there is an element of having that pre-composed, almost perfectionist thing about doing your set and practicing it loads, which isn't actually how people view comedy. We watch these comedians on telly, and we're like, imagine thinking of that just now. That's crazy. Where it's like, no, he's toured that show for 3 years, and he's just fine-tuned that joke enough to put it on telly.
Yeah, and it's also on the opposite end. It's hard to explain to people who think, joke XYZ is really brilliant and clever. That joke XYZ is a very generic joke format that's used very, very frequently. Because they don't care. It's the first time they've heard it. Why do they give a shit?
I think that fine-tuning of painting that you found frustrating is potentially also present in comedy writing. Do you have that sort of perfectionist thing about performing and when a joke doesn't land in the way you wanted it to, or timing, or?
Yes, but it doesn't, but not to the same degree, in the sense that it doesn't cripple me from doing it. Whereas I think with painting it does, or with art in general it does. Because even if the drawing or painting I do is quite good, I can see how much it's not like what was in my head. And I can see how much it's not like I know it could be if I was better. I can see the errors very immediately.
Yeah.
So it does kind of slow me down a lot, which is very common in people who also can't do drawings at all.
I know that this is meant to look like that, and then sometimes it's so hard to work out. Maybe that's one of the things when you become a better draftsman, is you go, of course, because I've done this proportion wrong. But I remember exactly like when you're doing your GCSE or whatever, and you're like, I know that it doesn't look right. I'm not sure what bit I need to change.
I found that I got much better at certain types of art by doing design and technology in sixth form. By just learning how to do sort of to scale drawings and perspective and stuff in a much more sort of formalized way, which isn't very fashionable in art, but it can come in handy.
Well, that's the thing. The idea of doing proper painting like Rembrandt does isn't very fashionable. And for a while, painting in general was pretty unfashionable, especially if you were a young up-and-coming artist. It was like, well, why aren't you doing what Damien Hirst does and put something dead in a box? And then actually painting is sort of having a bit of a comeback. So now it is quite edgy if someone who goes to Central St. Martin's does a landscape. You're like, wow.
Yeah. Look at this grass, you idiots. Yeah.
You don't get it.
Just look at it.
Pierre, thank you so much for coming on the little program today. Could you let us know where it's best to follow you and where we can hear from you?
Twitter and Instagram. I'm the only Pierre in the UK who does comedy who has hair. So if you search Pierre comedian, I'm not the bald one, I'm the other one. And I do a podcast once a week with Phil Wang called Bud Pod, which do like and subscribe and blah, blah, blah. And I do some streaming on Twitch as well. So those are the places to find me during the apocalypse right now, I'd say.
Thanks so much for watching. You can follow Pierre in the ways written below, and as per usual, you can follow me at BerityBabsArt on Instagram. Please do give us a like, a subscribe, a share, and I will see you next time.